Hello, and thank you everybody for joining us today for our monthly webinar. I'm Nancy, the program product manager for public safety, and I'm joined with Kelsey McCarty, who is one of our solutions consultants. She is going to be taking us through accrual profiles today. So basically, here are some of the things we're going to talk about today. Basically, just overall how accruals work in the system. And you can use accruals, and you can also, if you don't want to use accruals, you could still use the time off balance banks as well. Building the accrual profiles and managing them as well. If you need to make changes to the accruals, and you need to start and stop accruals, we'll go through that. Assigning the profiles to the members, and understanding there is a profile date range versus a start accruing date. Sometimes that could be a little confusing, so Kelsey will go through that and explain that a little bit better. So as usual, we are recording the webinar and we will send it out to you via an email. If not today, it'll be tomorrow. And if you have any questions, pop them into the questions panel there on your GoToWebinar screen thing. And I will answer those in the background, or I might even share them with Kelsey if it's something that would be beneficial for everybody to hear about. If for some reason I don't get to them though, know that we will still reach out to you after the show and answer those for you, so we won't leave you hanging. I think that's everything. So Kelsey, if you want to go ahead and take over, we'll start taking a closer look at it.
Sure. All right, well, we're gonna switch gears here. I'm gonna pull up my screen for you folks. Hopefully everything came up all right for everyone. So my name is Kelsey McCarty, as Nancy mentioned. I am a solutions consultant here with TCP Aladtec. So over the course of the last few years, I've worked with probably a few hundred customers across all public safety industries to build and configure systems and talk about things just like accruals. So this is a pretty common topic that comes up with people. They have other products that don't necessarily have the functionality to do what they need, or they don't have a product, and they're looking for Aladtec to help with those sorts of things. So one of the key things to note as we look into this today is that our accruals module in Aladtec is tied to our payroll module. So assuming we all have that, you will have access to accruals. If you do not have the payroll module, that is something you would need to have in order to have those accruals function. So the basic concept is that we are going to add profiles for typically years of service. We're going to assign those profiles to people, and then the system's going to allow you to add and deduct time from a bank to help automate some of that process. So to start out, if we are in the back-end settings of our system, we're just in our ATS fake test system today with some fake people, some fake schedules for some examples. And as you go through your setup menu here, underneath your time off tab, you will have the ability to go through and start defining types of time off that you would like to utilize in your system. Now, these can be things that are paid or unpaid, things that are going to accrue or not accrue. You've got a lot of flexibility here. If we're talking someone without accruals, these are going to be things that will give you some tracking capacity. You can pull some reports on use of this time. So sometimes some granular options here are pretty helpful. When it comes to the accruals, the only word of warning that goes along with this is each one of those types has an associated bank. So if you are a department that has personal sick leave and family sick leave, for example, they do need to be under one type if we are pulling them from one singular bank. So that's just kind of something to think about as you build out the types of time off that you're going to have in the system. So looking down here, if you do not have this turned on, you will see a little check mark box you can click on to enable your time off accruals if you have the payroll module. And it's going to bring up a screen that's going to allow you to add additional profiles. So there's a great degree of flexibility here depending upon different department needs. Everybody kind of handles these things a little differently. So for example, you could have one profile that's valid for the first 20 years of your employment. You could have be a part of a department that has 3 different subsets of these with 4 different date range options where you're going to have a big list of these. It really depends on your individual policy for the agency that you work for. But typically what we see is, like I mentioned earlier, some kind of years of service indicator. As they get to another mile marker, those accrual rates change, and that's what kind of dictates those profiles. It could also be something like an hourly employee versus a salaried employee. Maybe those rates are different, where you would have a subset for paid hourly employees by years of service and then a whole nother set for salaried. You can have as many of these profiles as you ultimately need to. And it's really just a quick ad to start off at a jumping off point. So you're going to be able to give this a name, and this is going to be your easy display throughout the system. So, make it concise, make it something that's going to be easy for people to understand and for you to reference later. But it might be something like, salaried, and it's years 0 to year 5. You can kind of make this naming convention whatever you like. And you're going to note that right away, we're looking at types of time off that were defined up top here. So just because it's up here and it shows up down here doesn't mean we have to do something with it. By default, these are all set to not automatically accrue unless you set something differently. You will be able to go through each one of these and set a preference. So there's going to be some rate of accrual that you're going to enter here. So for example, when we click on this, you're going to get a pop-up menu where you can go through and pick a rate of accrual. So is it something that drops once a year or quarterly or once a month? Or does it follow the pay period that's defined in your system? Or even is it based off of number of hours worked? And is that worked hours based on what's on your schedule or worked hours versus what's in the time clock if you guys are using our time clock? So you've got a pretty good degree here. There are a couple of caveats to be aware of as far as this functionality goes. And those tie to the starts accruing date that's going to be utilized in the actual member profiles. So 2 limitations that you should be aware of. You cannot have 2 different banks accruing yearly at a different time. So there's going to be one date reference point used, and you'll see this inside the member profiles here in a bit. So if you have 2 annual things that drop, they're both going to have to drop on the first of the year. They're both going to have to drop on the person's anniversary. You can't set them to drop one at one date and one at the other. So that's something to be aware of. The other thing here is that if you have something that drops, let's say yearly and monthly, that start date plays a fact again. So if, let's say my hire date was January 1st of 2020, and my annual drop is supposed to happen on my anniversary, January 1st, 2020, a monthly drop is going to follow that same date as a reference, which means that that time is going to drop on the 1st of every month. So that is something to be aware of as well. So if we go through and start to kind of lay some of these out, let's say, for example, we hit yearly and every year you're going to get 120 hours of vacation. You can set this in and start to build out what that profile looks like. Now, if this is something in a different format, maybe it's something like every pay period you get 4 hours, or maybe personal time is accruing based off of your scheduled time. This is that feature that we've all seen at some point in our life where you accrue 0.02 or whatever the percentage or decimal is per hour worked. This is the mechanism that's going to let you do that. So you can go through and put in whatever that decimal is for every however many hours worked, and then you can tell the system how often this is updated. So this is going to be that drop time frame. Is it yearly? Is it going to drop quarterly, monthly, or by pay period? Now, one of the important things to note here is that as you set these up, you're going to have multiple profiles. Things like comp time. This one comes up quite a bit. Comp time does not typically have a mathematical equation that it follows that you can predict. So while comp time can be a type of leave in a system and it can be a time bank in your system, there's no predictable way to drop time into that comp time bank. So you can manually update comp time banks. The system will auto deduct when it's approved, but that is not ever going to be something that's going to be able to be automated as far as the initial drop of time that goes in there. So as you go through and set these up, you'll end up essentially with a chain of different accrual profiles. Once they are in use, you will notice that our little trash can over here is going to turn red. That is the safety mechanism in the system to make sure that you do not delete a profile that's currently in use. So that'll be an indicator that somebody's on this. You're not going to be able to make any changes or delete this profile until that profile has stopped running for people. Typically speaking, it's really just a matter of changing the end date of their profile, but it usually does require that you wait till the next day to actually delete the profile. They usually make you wait that full 24-hour window of time to make sure we're not cutting a shift in the middle where someone should get some credit for that. So from this point, we've built the foundation. We've got the layout of our general plan here. The next step to this would be to go in and start assigning this to people. Now, if you are a new department, accruals are a completely new thing to you inside of Aladtec. You're also going to be going through and doing the load of current balances. Most of our customer base that goes to accruals will come to us and say, I have a spreadsheet that I keep all of this information on currently. You're going to want to load those times in and then set up your accrual profiles to start running. So we got to have that starting point for balances. I usually do encourage customers to maybe put a pause on approving time off in their system while they do this initial setup if it's your first go around. It can get confusing if you're approving time as you're putting balances in and you're setting up profiles. So sometimes it's kind of nice to say we're not going to approve time off for the next couple of days while we do whatever we need to do to get this up and running, so you know you're not negatively impacting the process that you're trying to take here. So as you kind of get into the next phase of this, you're going to be doing that through the member database. And one of the things to note here is that there is an accrued time off types filter in this system if you have accruals turned on now. So you guys are probably used to coming into the member database and seeing something like member information when you first come in here. As you turn on that part of the system, you will actually have a pre-built accrued time off types filter. And that's going to show you people's banks. And if you would like to narrow this down, you certainly have the option to do that. You can come through and scroll through your filter options and turn off certain types. So if you're just strictly worried about, vacation, personal, and sick right now, you can actually remove the other ones from your view. You can even save that as a filter for yourself if it's something that you're going to use on a regular basis. So limiting that down makes it a little bit easier to follow. Just like filtering in any other area of the system, you could certainly add some member filters if you wanted to filter by something like employee type, maybe it's full-time or part-time. You can kind of get that subset of people shrunk down a little bit too. And this is where you would typically do your initial load of time. So if this is a brand new process to you, you're going to be able to come through and click on any person's time bank and simply add or subtract time. So let's say, for example, Stephen here had 82 hours of vacation time on the spreadsheet that you've been maintaining, and you're now going to run into the Aladtec accruals process. You can go ahead and add 82 hours to his bank. You could even come through and add a note. So if we ever look back at the historical record of this, you know why there was a modification to that. So that initial load process would be going through and adding those balances. And then each person will have a chain of actual profiles that they get assigned to. So as you scroll through the member database profile for your individual person, you will now note that once that's turned on, you'll see that time off accrual. And this person has some profiles set up in here already, so you can kind of see the effect and how this works. You will also see their time off banks in this location as well, with balances and the ability to edit or maintain these. So if we need to do something like add some comp time that was earned or make a manual adjustment, maybe something got goofed up, maybe there was a miscalculation in the process moving over from paper to the system, you can make a manual edit if you need to. And you're always going to be able to see every action that has happened. So you'll be able to see time that hours were used out of this bank, when the system came through and manually dropped time, and even when people go through and change profiles and change balance amounts, all of that's going to be recorded. We're going to flip members here so we can start with someone who doesn't have anything in their profile yet. So when this is a brand new process, you can go ahead and start by adding the accrual profiles. So this is kind of, my firefighters out there are probably going to cringe when I say this, but it's kind of like setting up a daisy chain of all the profiles. So as the initial setup of this, you could have someone associated with multiple profiles over a duration of time for the entire duration of their career with your department. So that one-time setup of the 0 to 5 year profile, and then the 5 to 10 year profile, and the 10 to 15 year profile, you can set that all up with effective date ranges, and the system will automate moving them through those profiles. So not only is it dropping time in banks and deducting from banks, but it's also auto advancing folks through those profiles as needed as well. So to go ahead and add a profile here, we just clicked that add time off accrual profile, and we can pick which profile this person is going to go into. So this is typically as of today. Where are they at today? Which profile are they a part of? You're not going to necessarily go backwards here. But let's say for the sake of ease here, that this gentleman started working for us, let's go December 15th, 2021. So he's currently in his 0 to 5 year profile. Now you're going to note that there's a couple of date ranges, and this is one of the things that gets kind of confusing for people. This is essentially an effective range for the profile. This one right here is the one that triggers when time is going to start accruing and drop for people. So as we noticed today, brand new profile, when we set this up, it automatically set the start date to today. That's when this took effect, because that's when we're making it. But you have to select an end date, and that end date should correspond with the transition to the next profile. So one of the things to think about, and this is kind of one of those odd concepts unless you're one of those HR folks that looks at this stuff all day long, is does the profile go year 0 to year 5, or does it include all of year 5? Those are the sorts of things you kind of want to think about, because you want to make sure that you're not jumping people to profiles too soon. So for the sake of example, let's say this is through year 5, and this person became eligible to get onto this profile as of his hire date. So December 15th, 2021, which means that this profile through year 5 would be be 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025, 2026. I'm a year off here. So it would be valid to this point. So as we change these dates, we're going to be able to see when these things are going to drop. You're going to watch these dates update as you go through. So what we've told the system is, hey, I'm building a new profile today. So this profile is starting today, and we're going to let this thing run through the end of that 5 year period. and we're going to tell the system, this person became eligible to earn on this profile as of this date. Now, if it's an anniversary date, this is going to be an anniversary date. If you're trying to drop time on an annual basis on, let's say, the first of the year, then that starts accruing date is going to be the first of the year with the appropriate year. That's going to drive where we see these dates drop. So having this set as December 15th, the next time that this is going to drop is December 15th of 2023. We've already bypassed December 15th of this year, so it's showing you the next time that's going to happen. Now, if it drops on a monthly basis, like this example here, just like I mentioned earlier, it's going to use that date as a time reference. So even though this is happening monthly, it's going to happen monthly on the 15th. If I was to go through and change this in any way, let's say, for example, this was January 1, you're going to watch those dates change. And you're going to note that those are now dropping annually January 1st. And the next consecutive month happens to be January. So it drop on the 1st of the next month. So that date's going to play a big role.
Kelsey, can I ask you a couple questions there if I could interrupt you?
Sure.
Okay, so I have one question here that Amanda is asking. If the drop is scheduled, but an employee is not going to be eligible for the vacation because they're not on probation, can you override it and prevent it from dropping the time?
That there is no, like, don't allow them to do this for a certain period of time. What I typically will see people do is they will keep track and drop that time into the bank initially once they are eligible and have that profile start running once they're eligible to start using it. If the time is in a bank in Aladtec, they have access to it unless you completely turn off your time off for that group of people inside of their work groups. So it kind of depends on the route. If you want to be able to and are able to limit access to time off requests, you could certainly turn those off and have the accruals run. They just don't have the option to use them. Or you could keep a manual track for that probationary period.
Okay, perfect. Here's another one that I have a question for, if you don't mind. Josie asks, what access levels would have the authority to manually adjust the accruals once they're built?
It's going to be people that have access to edit member database profiles. So that's going to be a control inside of the access level setting based on what you determined those people should be able to do.
Perfect.
So, all right. Is there any other questions?
Yeah, no, that's it for now. Thank you.
You bet, of course. So we've kind of gone through what do these dates mean. Think about this in terms of profile is effective for these dates versus when were they eligible and what's driving when this time drops. So as we go through and add this chain of profiles for someone, once you go ahead and hit add accrual profile, it's going to start the next tier. And you're going to notice they're going to take off in each other's stead. This is what you want to happen. You want a profile to end and the next one to immediately take effect. If you leave a gap in there, it's going to result in somebody not getting credit for time. So they're always going to be a consecutive right back to back. And you can simply just go through and start jumping those profiles. So their next profile would be 6 to 10 years, which would put an end date for this one of 2031. And once, 31, 15. And you can just keep going on down the line. So you can see it's pretty quick once you figure out what the game plan is and you get that foundation in place for yourself to jump and set these up fairly quickly. So once this is in place, it's automatically going to advance Herbert through these profiles once his anniversary date is reached, or if you're doing an annual occurrence on the 1st, once the next annual period is reached. And that's going to start dropping those hours into that bank for you. Now, once those are assigned and created, there are times where those things need to change. So we're going to switch gears here and look at a different employee. If we go into Dave's profile here, this gentleman has profiles that are running already. He had a historical one that he ran through that ended on January 1st of 2021 when he advanced to the next profile. And you're seeing that you can't change or you can't delete this profile because it's currently in use. Again, that safety mechanism, we're not breaking something that's actively running. But you could come in and change the next profile that hasn't been utilized yet. So for example, let's say he were to advance to a higher ranking position in the department. He's now salaried, which means that his next profile is not valid. You do have the ability to come in here and delete this profile. You can simply do a click, remove that profile. And if we needed to, let's say, change when this one is going to jump next so we can have him advance to the new profile when he should, you're always going to have the ability to edit these and adjust this time. So let's say, for example, he got this promotion. It's going to take effect the first of the year, 2023. You can come in here and change that date. So we can essentially, kind of like what we do with repeats and rotations, end the pattern early so that we can jump them over somewhere else. So we can go ahead and update that profile. Once that change is done, the existing profile is going to stop January 1st. And if we need to go add a new profile, we can go ahead and pull up the next profile that he should be a part of, and you're going to watch those consecutive dates jump. So if he needs to now kind of have a couple more profiles added for duration in this time frame, you can certainly do that. Now the same rule applies. Let's say, for example, there's a department change that results in your rate of accrual changing. So now you've got a profile that someone's associated with, but the rate isn't correct. You're going to want to do the exact same thing, with the exception of making the change to this profile in the back end. You're going to end this period sooner and jump and associate them with a new profile. So a lot of times we will see people leave this and in the back end settings, create a new profile with the amended time adjustments, and we'll end the current profile and start them off on the new chain at the new rate. So you're not going to be able to just delete something if somebody's running. You're going to, just like repeats and rotations, change that end date in order to get people onto new profiles as things adjust. All right. So as you go through here, we get these all set up. Time starts dropping into banks. We're going to start to see this time deposit, like I mentioned. You will be able to see that here. Your employees will be able to see their bank. They're never going to have the ability to click on this or change it, obviously. And you will be able to go through and see those bank balances or make quick edits through the member database. Now, one of the things that is not in the system presently is the concept of capping time off. Let's say, for example, your department has a policy where you're not allowed to have more than 400 hours carry over the next year, whatever that number might be. That is something that you do have to be mindful of, and it would be a manual update. I have also had customers tell me that you do PTO buybacks, where you can essentially sell some of your time to back to your company for cash instead of paid off time. Those are things that are not automated in the system, but there are ways to accommodate those things. So for example, anytime you look at any of these columns, just like normal in the member database, you can click on these to resort them. So let's say it's January 1st. We've got people that have too many hours. It's a use it or lose it over 400. You can sort your people by their balances and come in and make a quick adjustment. So, hey, we got to reduce 80 hours. And this person's got to lose 24 hours. Again, we can put notes in there. And then I added it instead of subtracting it. There we go. So we can go ahead and add and deduct time to get those balances correct. If you are someone who does things like a buyback, we have had customers create a buyback form in the system where someone can request a buyback. And then you can kind of go a few different routes ultimately, but essentially you would have to manually use some of this time and manipulate some of this time to buy that back and change that balance. You do have batch editing capabilities back here. So if you do have, let's say, for example, a drop where everybody gets this one-time, one-off situation, you can go through and click and mass select people's names, and you do have batch editing capabilities here. So let's say, for example, you have a charitable contribution benefit at your department. Maybe if you donate a little bit out of your paycheck or something to an organization or a charity, they throw you an extra vacation day or an extra personal day. You can go through and update people in bulk, or even go through and pick and choose people, and manually drop that time into their bank. So, hey, all these people are going to get 8 hours. It's the charity benefit. And it's going to be used just like normal time, but it's a one-off. It's a one-time thing. We can go ahead and mass add time to people's banks that way. So that's a very, very straightforward, quick process that you guys should be pretty used to with the member database editing. As far as this data goes, as I mentioned, from an employee perspective, they will be able to find somebody that doesn't have access. They will be able to look at like their own My Info page, and they will be able to see time in their banks or see what accruals they're associated with. They won't have the ability to edit any of this. So they've got visibility, but that's it. Once those accruals are turned on, if they go in and attempt to request some time off, they will have balances that become visible. So for example, Seth knows that his bank currently has 32 hours of sick leave. This is going to cost him 8 hours, and it is going to result in an ending balance of 24 hours. So he can go ahead and send this request over. As an administrator or somebody with scheduling authority, you guys are going to see that same information. There is no option to prevent someone from putting in a request that is going to send them negative. We do know there's always those situations that come up in real life where there may be a time where you need to pivot somewhere else, or you may need to approve something into the negative. So there is no hard stop at this point. But we'll look at that request here in a moment where you guys can see what those look like.
Kelsey, if I could interrupt you, I got one more question for you.
Sure.
If a manager changes the time type at any time, does the system recognize that?
Like the time off type?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely it will. It'll pivot things. If you cancel a time off request that's approved, it's going to automatically refund the time to the bank. So those things, the system is paying attention to those and adding and deducting appropriately. The one thing to note, especially if you have adding and deleting happening, is you want to be mindful of your PTO time tracking. So let's say, for example, you accidentally deleted something that you weren't supposed to. And you're just going to go back in, and I'm going to go ahead and put time off back in here for Dave Anderson. He doesn't have a scheduled shift anymore. So you do want to make sure that you're thinking about that. If you're clicking on a shift and putting in time off for someone, you do want it to track based on the scheduled shift. But if you're putting something back on and you need to make sure that that time deducts correctly, and you don't have a shift to click on to do so, you do want to make sure you click entire range, or to make sure you're getting credit for that time. So as you change your time here, you'll start to see that time frame adjust. So that is something to be mindful of.
Got it. Thank you.
You bet. As an employee, they will be able to see things like their own individual member report. And once accruals are turned on, they will be able to see a running track record. of when time goes into their bank. So they're not necessarily going to be able to click on those little clock icons in their member profiles, but they will be able to see breakdowns of this detail for whatever time range they look at. So you can come through and see, well, what's been going on with my sick leave for the last couple of years. You can go through and see every expenditure, every drop, every time somebody adjusted something, so that there's a running track record of that. And you guys as administrators will see that too, where you can toggle between people if you want to look at that information as well. I think the last thing to note here, and this is an important distinction for some departments depending upon how you handle time off, and that is the concept of when this is going to deduct from a bank. So we have Seth's leave request here. You know, we can see all the exact details. If this was going to put him into the negative, you would actually see this in bright red, bold text, negative number. It might be an indicator that you should deny that request, or there may be a special exemption where you're going to let that happen. But it is at this point exactly that this time is going to deduct from this bank. So as I click approve, Seth's balance is going to update automatically. So if I were to go, he's at 32 hours now, we approve that time, and then we go look at Seth in the member database, he now has 24 hours there. So if they're putting in time off 6 months out and you're approving it, it's going to deduct from that bank at the moment of approval. So that is just something to be aware of. It's not forecasting forward, it's deducting as of the moment that it's approved. If that was canceled, it would immediately go back into the bank at that moment too. So there's no big lag time for that to be aware of either. So that kind of brings us towards the end of this, guys. That's probably one of the more complicated parts of the Aladtec system to learn and wrap your brain around. Kudos to all those HR people out there that understand this stuff inside and out, because it's like a different language sometimes. Are there any other questions out there, Nancy, or anything that's just unanswered still?
Yeah, I've got a few more here for you. This one came up a couple times, so thought we could address it. Is it possible to enter a max in accruals?
There is not. Nope. That would be that manual manipulation of maybe sorting those banks to see balance values. And then you're going to have to manually reduce those.
Perfect. Is there a way to change the profile in settings while it is in use without canceling everyone's dates?
No, not while it's running. If it is actively in play, it does have to be stopped and re-entered.
Okay. And then one other question is that, can you briefly touch on the accrual dates that they're not overlapping? Because they might get an error that the accrual dates cannot overlap. What is it they're probably doing wrong? Are they having their dates are incorrect on the profile setup?
Yeah. So if we go back to our friend Herbert here, when we're looking at profiles, let's say, for example, 0 to 5, let's just pick some time ranges just to make this easy peasy. And then let's say we add another profile. Actually, we're gonna take one step back. We're gonna do this first. You are gonna have to save, so don't forget your save button. I'm gonna attach him to one profile and save, and then I'm gonna come in here and I'm gonna add another profile. I'm gonna do 6 to 10, but I'm going to try to backdate this to a day that's already passed. And let's say this is gonna run out to here and try to hit save. It's gonna yell at you that you can't have profiles that have an overlapping date range. And what that specifically means is we have one of these profiles set to end December 15th, 2023. You can't start another profile while another one is still running. So they have to kind of be the domino effect. One's got to end
Mhm.
right when the other one takes off.
Perfect. Glad you could show that and display it. Another one came up too that this one is a common one that people were asking. Is there a way to have two different time types come out of the same accrual bank?
No, it is going to have to be one bank and one type. So there is no option. You might want to get a little creative with maybe your naming convention,
Mhm.
or there might be some other tracking mechanisms you might need to use, such as a note or maybe a report from a form or something like that to differentiate those hours if need be.
Okay, perfect. And then one more, because this one came up a little bit at time too. And so I thought maybe we can at least explain it. The question is there a way to run a report that would show the accrual balance as of a certain date and that it excludes future time off that's been approved? Does that make sense? I don't know that there is, but I wanted to run it by you if you had some thoughts.
You can pull data for a period of time, but even if it's, let's say, future date, essentially it's approved right at the moment you click the button. So there's no way to pull that out per se.
Right.
So if you were looking at like that individual member report, you can run this for custom ranges, weeks, months, whatever ultimately you would like to see. But you're going to see that that time is deducted as of today, not 6 months from now. So there's going to be a date and time stamp associated with that for when it's removed from the bank, not when it's actually reached that date, if that makes sense.
Yep. Okay, perfect. I think that should mostly be it for now, and we're getting close to time here. So if for some reason we didn't get to it, we'll answer it after the fact, but we are coming kind of short on time here. So I think we'll leave it at that. Thanks, Kelsey. That was a really good refresher on all the accrual profile information. Just to let people know, next month, I know we usually have these every second Thursday of the month. We do have a company-wide event that is going on, so unfortunately we won't be able to have our January monthly meeting, monthly webinar meeting, sorry, couldn't think of the right word. So just to let you know that we will still, of course, pick things back up in February. But we also, of course, always keep all of our webinar recordings out in the system help section as well. So feel free to look in there to get some refreshers on the things that we've done in the past on past topics. So thank you so much for your time today. And if you have any other further questions about this or anything else, always know, of course, you can call our support team. They do a great job. You can call them, you can send a chat, you can email them. Thanks, Kelsey, for showing that. So feel free to always reach out to them with any of the questions, and they're great at helping you out. So thanks again, and you guys have a great rest of your day.